By the time the third sun rose above Alindra's silver horizon, the royal capital had already begun to glow with the cold brilliance of a machine pretending to be a city. Towers of transparent alloy curved over the clouds, transit vessels moved between them in silent streams, and beneath the ceremonial district, buried inside 12 layers of shielded stone and magnetic armor, the Helion reactor waited to be awakened. It was said the reactor could draw energy from the space between dimensions, enough to power every inhabited moon in the Alindran system for 1,000 years. It was also said, mostly by engineers after their second glass of fermented starfruit, that anything involving the phrase, space between dimensions, should never be activated before breakfast. Sergeant Elias Venn stood at the eastern entrance of the Royal Observation Hall, watching alien dignitaries glide past in robes that shimmered with embedded constellations. He wore plain human combat armor, dark and practical, with none of the ceremonial gold favored by the Alindran Royal Guard. Compared with the towering soldiers around him, whose polished armor adjusted color according to rank and mood, Elias looked less like a hero and more like someone who had arrived to repair a ventilation unit. Several guards had already mistaken him for maintenance personnel. One had even handed him a broken pulse lance. Elias had fixed it. That had somehow made the situation worse. "Human," said Captain Vaelor, approaching with the rigid dignity of a man who believed smiling was a disciplinary offense. His long ears rose sharply from beneath his silver helmet, and his pale eyes briefly inspected Elias from boots to shoulders. "Your assignment is to remain near the Western Royal Corridor. Do not interfere with Alindran security procedures." "Understood," Elias replied. "Should I also avoid fixing any more of your weapons?" Vaelor's ears twitched. That lance was improperly calibrated. "Of course." Elias nodded solemnly. It was suffering emotionally. Vaelor stared at him for several seconds, then walked away without responding. Elias considered that a victory. Near the center of the hall stood Queen Seraphine, surrounded by ministers, scientists, and military commanders. She had the appearance of a human woman at first glance, though no human possessed ears so long and elegantly tapered, or eyes that reflected faint threads of golden light. Her silver blonde hair fell over armor shaped like ceremonial glass, and every movement around her seemed to slow slightly, as if the room itself understood who ruled it. Beside her stood Princess Lyra, 8 years old, restless, and clearly uninterested in speeches about interdimensional energy. Her long ears protruded through her carefully braided hair, tilting toward every interesting sound. She noticed Elias watching the crowd and immediately escaped from her tutor. "Are you really from Earth?" she asked, stopping in front of him. "That depends," Elias said. "Are you collecting taxes?" Lyra frowned in concentration. "No." "Then yes, definitely from Earth." She looked at his armor. "It is very plain." "Thank you." That was not praise. "Then I withdraw my gratitude." Her mouth twitched, and Elias saw her trying not to laugh. Behind her, the royal tutor arrived with the exhausted expression of someone who had lost an argument with a small hurricane. "Your Highness, the activation ceremony is beginning. I am asking the human important questions, such as whether Earth has sky whales." Elias leaned closer. "Only in the northern oceans. They migrate during tax season." Lyra's eyes widened. The tutor closed hers. "Sergeant, please do not invent animals for the princess." "I would never invent something as dangerous as accounting whales." Before the tutor could reply, the floor beneath them gave a faint vibration. It was subtle enough that most of the guests continued talking, but Elias felt it through the soles of his boots. Across the hall, a holographic model of the reactor flickered. For less than a second, the glowing sphere at its center turned black. Then the image corrected itself. Elias glanced toward the engineers near the control platform. One of them had noticed. The scientist quickly whispered to another, who checked a wrist display and shook his head. Above the observation windows, the artificial sky brightened as the reactor entered its first ignition phase. A low harmonic tone passed through the structure, beautiful and unnerving, like a choir singing from the bottom of an ocean. Lyra looked upward in wonder. Elias did not. His gaze remained fixed on the control platform, where one warning symbol flashed and vanished before anyone announced it. The second vibration came stronger. A crystal glass slid across a table and fell, breaking against the floor. Conversations paused. Captain Vaelor immediately spoke into his comm unit, while the chief engineer forced a smile and assured the Queen that minor gravitational adjustments were expected. Elias had heard similar assurances before. They usually meant the opposite. Lyra moved closer to him. "Is that normal?" she whispered. Elias watched a thin line of blue energy crawl across the far wall and disappear into the metal. "Probably," he said. "And when adults say probably, it means they have everything completely under control." She studied his face. "You do not believe that. You are going to make an excellent queen." Deep beneath them, something struck the reactor chamber from the inside. This time the entire hall shook. The impact rolled through the observation hall like thunder trapped inside metal. Lights vanished, returned in violent red pulses, and the transparent walls filled with streams of emergency symbols. For one breath, no one moved. Then every dignitary, scientist, and guard decided at once that remaining calm was someone else's responsibility. The hall erupted into shouting. "Reactor containment failure," announced the station intelligence in a pleasant female voice. "Please proceed to the nearest evacuation route. Running is discouraged." Everyone began running. Elias caught Lyra before the shaking floor threw her beneath a table. Across the chamber, sections of the ceiling split apart, releasing showers of bright fragments that dissolved before touching the ground. Queen Seraphine shouted her daughter's name, but a collapsing energy barrier surged between them, dividing the hall with a wall of blue fire. Royal guards pulled the Queen toward the eastern exit as another explosion tore through the corridor behind her. "Lyra!" she screamed. The princess tried to run toward her mother, but Elias held her back as the barrier thickened. "We cannot cross that. My mother is there. And she has 12 armored guards, 3 generals, and 1 captain with no sense of humor." Elias lifted her into his arms. "You have me. Admittedly, that is a less impressive number." Captain Vaelor appeared beyond the barrier, striking it with his pulse lance. "Take the princess to Dock 7. His voice broke beneath the alarms. "We will meet you there." Then the corridor behind him collapsed, and the Queen's escort disappeared into smoke. Elias turned toward the western evacuation passage. Hundreds of guests were already forcing themselves through the opening. Noble robes tore, ceremonial masks were trampled, and one ambassador attempted to declare diplomatic immunity against the explosion. The explosion ignored him. Elias carried Lyra along the wall, avoiding the crowd. The station intelligence continued speaking with unbearable calm. "Containment stability is now 41%. This remains above 0, which is encouraging." "I do not like that voice," Lyra said. "Neither do I. She sounds far too cheerful for someone announcing our deaths." A deep roar echoed through the floor. It did not sound mechanical. Elias stopped. The air ahead rippled, folding inward as if invisible hands were twisting the corridor. A black line opened in the center of the passage, spilling violet sparks across the walls. From within it came shapes with too many limbs and glass-like skin. The first creature dragged itself through the dimensional fracture, unfolded to twice Elias's height, and opened a circular mouth lined with moving teeth. The crowd saw it and changed direction so quickly that several officials collided with one another. Guards fired wildly. Pulse rounds struck the creature, scattering pieces of crystal flesh, but it kept advancing. "What is that?" Lyra whispered. "Something the reactor's instruction manual probably forgot to mention." Elias lowered her behind a reinforced column and drew his rifle. "Stay here. You cannot order a princess." "Excellent. Then consider it a strongly worded suggestion." He fired in controlled bursts, aiming not at the creature's armored body, but at the glowing joints beneath its limbs. The alien shrieked as 2 legs collapsed. A guard beside Elias stared at him. "How did you know where to shoot?" It was limping before I met it. It was not. Then I was extremely lucky. More creatures emerged from the fracture. The guards broke formation. One fled first, then 3 more followed, leaving civilians to push past them. Elias watched them disappear and felt something cold settle inside him. These were soldiers trained to stand before royal banners, yet the moment the banners stopped watching, courage became negotiable. The wounded creature lunged. Elias threw himself aside, rolled beneath one of its limbs, and fired into the glowing cavity under its chest. It burst apart in a storm of sharp fragments. "That was disgusting," Lyra said from behind the column. "Yes." Elias wiped transparent fluid from his shoulder. "And I have just cleaned this armor." The dimensional lie widened. Warning lights changed from red to white. "Primary reactor field collapse in 11 minutes, the station intelligence announced. Evacuation vessels are departing. Elias reached the main junction just in time to see the last royal transport lifting from the platform beyond the window. Dozens of people hammered against the sealed doors, begging the pilots to return. The ship accelerated toward the sky. Lyra stared at it in silence. "They left," she said. Elias looked down the branching corridors. One led toward Dock 7, now marked inaccessible. Another descended into maintenance sectors beneath the palace. Behind them, the creatures were gathering. "They panicked," he said. "There is a difference." "Is there?" Elias met her eyes and found no childish confusion there, only the first painful understanding of betrayal. He knelt, so they were level. "Yes. Panic explains what people do. It does not excuse it." A distant blast bent the walls inward. Elias checked his rifle, lifted Lyra onto his back, and secured her arms around his shoulders. "Are you going to leave me too?" she asked. "No." "How do I know?" "Because carrying a princess through a collapsing reactor complex is still easier than explaining to your mother that I misplaced you." Lyra gave a frightened laugh and held tighter. Elias stepped into the dark maintenance passage as the doors sealed behind them. Somewhere below, something enormous began climbing toward the surface. The maintenance passage descended beneath the royal complex in a narrow spiral, each level darker than the one above. Elias moved carefully, one hand holding his rifle while the other steadied Lyra on his back. Emergency strips along the walls flickered in uneven bursts, illuminating pipes thick enough to carry rivers and cables that pulsed with trapped blue energy. Every few seconds the floor tilted as the damaged gravity system tried to remember which direction was down. Lyra tightened her arms around his shoulders. "Does this happen often on Earth?" "Only on public transportation." "What is public transportation?" "A machine designed to teach patience through suffering." She considered that answer seriously while Elias stepped over a split conduit leaking clouds of silver vapor. His wrist display showed Dock 7 3 kilometers away, but the direct route had vanished from the station map. Entire sections blinked in and out as the reactor's dimensional field distorted the structure. A corridor that had existed 10 seconds earlier now ended inside a solid wall. Another appeared to continue for several hundred meters before folding upward like a ribbon. Elias stopped at a junction where 3 identical passages stretched into darkness. "Which one?" Lyra asked. "The safest." "Which is?" "I was hoping you knew." She leaned to one side and pointed toward the middle passage. "That one smells less terrible." A sophisticated royal navigation method. They entered the center corridor. Behind them, something scraped against the metal. Elias turned, but the passage was empty. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a wet clicking noise. He set Lyra down and guided her behind a service console. "Remember the strongly worded suggestion? Stay hidden. You are learning quickly. I am a princess." That explains everything except the running away from tutors. Lyra almost smiled, but the clicking became a heavy impact. A creature dropped from the ceiling, its transparent body bending the emergency light into sharp rainbows. It moved on 6 hooked limbs and carried the remains of a security drone inside its ribcage. Elias fired twice. The rounds shattered against its outer shell. The creature sprang forward. Elias ducked beneath its claws, struck one joint with the rifle stock, and rolled behind a coolant pipe as the beast tore the console apart. Lyra covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Elias noticed the creature's movements slowing whenever it crossed a leaking power cable. He fired into the cable. A surge of white current spread across the floor. The creature convulsed, its glass-like body flashing from within before collapsing into a smoking heap. Elias stared at it for a moment. "Good news," he said. "It appears to dislike electricity. Most creatures dislike electricity. That is why it remains one of humanity's most dependable arguments." The station intelligence interrupted them. "Structural integrity has fallen to 32%. Personnel are advised not to stand beneath unstable ceilings." A section of ceiling crashed down behind Elias. He looked upward. Excellent timing. They continued deeper until the passage opened into a circular chamber filled with abandoned repair machines. Floating drones drifted near the ceiling, spinning without purpose. At the center stood an inactive cargo lift leading toward Dock 7. Elias opened the control panel and found half the circuits burned away. "Can you repair it?" Lyra asked. "Of course." "You said that very quickly. Confidence is useful when knowledge is unavailable." He removed a power cell from a broken drone and connected it to the lift controls. Sparks jumped across his gloves. The platform shuddered, dropped half a meter, then stabilized. Lyra stared at him. Was that supposed to happen? It has now become part of the plan. The lift began rising through the shaft. As they ascended, Elias saw the damage spreading beneath them. Whole corridors twisted around the reactor core, suspended in impossible angles. Through cracks in the walls, distant stars appeared where stone and machinery should have been. The explosion had not merely damaged the complex, it had torn holes into somewhere else. Lyra watched in silence until a pulse of golden light flashed from her wrist. A small royal beacon appeared beneath her sleeve. "My mother can track this," she said. Elias checked it. The signal was weak, but active. "Then we keep it transmitting." Far above, Queen Seraphine stood inside a damaged command center while officers argued around her. Rescue teams had already withdrawn from the western sectors, declaring them lost. Captain Vaelor tried to convince her to board the final evacuation cruiser, but she refused to move. Then a technician shouted and enlarged a faint signal on the central display. The princess's beacon flickered beneath layers of interference. Seraphine placed both hands on the console. "She is alive." "The signal may be corrupted," one commander warned. "It may be a reactor echo." The queen turned toward him, her long ears angled sharply back. "Then we will rescue the echo." She ordered every remaining soldier toward the lower sectors. Several officers hesitated. Some quietly exchanged glances, already calculating the political consequences of a dead heir. Seraphine saw them and understood more than they intended. Back in the lift, Elias heard a metallic groan above them. The platform stopped. Darkness swallowed the shaft. Lyra whispered his name. Elias raised his rifle as dozens of small red eyes opened along the walls. "I have another strongly worded suggestion," he said. "Do not look up." Naturally, Lyra looked up. The red eyes moved before Elias could count them. Small creatures detached from the shaft walls and unfolded thin, blade-like legs, their bodies no larger than his hand, but fast enough to become silver streaks in the dark. He fired upward, and the first burst shattered 3 of them. The rest poured down the lift cables. "Now you may look down," he said. Lyra crouched beside the control panel while Elias kicked one creature from the platform and crushed another beneath his boot. A third landed on his shoulder and stabbed through the outer layer of his armor. He caught it, pulled it free, and threw it into the shaft. "Are you hurt?" Lyra asked. "Only personally offended." The swarm thickened. Elias tore the emergency power cell from the lift controls and hurled it against the wall. The explosion filled the shaft with white current. The creatures shrieked as electricity raced through their metallic limbs, and for one blinding second the darkness became a cage of burning blue lines. Then the lift dropped. Lyra screamed. Elias seized a maintenance rail with one hand and caught her with the other as the platform fell away beneath them. The shaft became a rushing tunnel of smoke and sparks. He pulled Lyra against his chest, boots sliding along the rail until he managed to hook an elbow around a broken support beam. The platform struck the bottom far below and vanished in a burst of orange light. Lyra stared downward. Was that part of the plan? It has become a less successful part of the plan. A service hatch waited several meters above them. Elias climbed slowly, every movement sending pain through his wounded shoulder. Lyra remained silent until they reached the hatch, then whispered, "You can put me down if I am too heavy. You weigh less than my field pack." "What is in your field pack?" "Mostly equipment, some food. One sock whose partner died bravely." She laughed despite herself, and the sound gave Elias enough strength to force the hatch open. They crawled into a corridor that should have led toward Dock 7, but the reactor had changed it. The passage bent in impossible curves, its floor rising into one wall while the ceiling continued straight ahead. Furniture, cables, and broken drones floated through sections where gravity had failed entirely. A doorway opened onto the same corridor from the opposite direction. Elias dropped a spent cartridge through it and watched the casing fall from the ceiling behind them. "That seems inconvenient," Lyra said. "On Earth, architects charge extra for this." His wrist map spun uselessly. The royal beacon still transmitted, but the signal appeared in 3 places at once. Somewhere beyond the walls, the damaged reactor pulsed with a slow rhythm, and each pulse made the corridor shift. Elias chose the path that moved least. They passed laboratories filled with shattered containment tanks. In one room, black vines grew across the walls, blooming with pale eyes instead of flowers. In another, rain fell upward into a hole in the ceiling. Lyra kept close, no longer asking questions. Elias noticed and handed her a compact emergency scanner. "Your job is to watch the readings." "What am I looking for?" "Anything that says danger." "Everything says danger." "Excellent. The scanner is working." The humor returned a little color to her face. At the next junction, the scanner chimed. Lyra pointed toward a sealed security door marked with an ancient royal symbol. "There is power behind it." Elias tried the controls, but the door rejected his access. Lyra placed her hand against the panel. Golden light spread beneath her fingers, and hidden symbols appeared across the wall. The system spoke in an old Elindran dialect. "Bloodline recognized. Complete the sovereign sequence." "Do you know it?" Elias asked. "My tutors made me learn ceremonial codes." "I take back every complaint I made about tutors." "You complained about them?" "Only internally, very respectfully." Lyra touched 5 symbols in a precise pattern. The door opened onto a hidden command chamber. Holographic displays activated around them, showing the reactor complex from before the explosion. Elias studied the system logs while Lyra searched for a route to the docks. At first, he saw only cascading failures. Then one line caught his attention. The primary containment locks had not failed. They had been opened remotely 47 seconds before the first explosion. Someone with royal-level authorization had disabled the shields. "Elias," Lyra said, "I found a maintenance tunnel." He did not answer immediately. Another record appeared, showing evacuation doors sealed in the sectors assigned to the royal family. The explosion had been arranged to trap them. This was not a malfunction. It was an execution. A new signal flashed on the display. Someone else had entered the hidden network and was searching for the princess's beacon. Elias shut down the chamber at once. "We need to move." "Did you find something?" "Yes." "What?" He looked at the child, knowing that whoever caused the disaster might also be among the people searching for her. "The reactor has terrible management." Before Lyra could question him, the security door behind them began to open from the other side. The security door opened slowly, its ancient mechanisms grinding beneath the strain of distorted gravity. Elias pulled Lyra behind the central console and raised his rifle toward the widening gap. 3 figures entered wearing black combat armor without insignia. Their helmets were smooth, their weapons compact, and their movements too disciplined to belong to frightened survivors. "Royal beacon confirmed," one of them said. "The princess is inside." Elias switched off his rifle's targeting light. Lyra leaned close. "Are they rescue soldiers?" "No." "How do you know?" "Rescue soldiers usually begin with 'we found her,' not 'confirm the beacon.' It is a subtle difference, but an important one." The first intruder stepped farther into the chamber. Elias fired once. The pulse struck the weapon in the soldier's hands and sent it spinning across the floor. Before the others could react, Elias shot the ceiling projector. The chamber filled with blinding holographic fragments, false walls, duplicate consoles, and dozens of flickering images of Lyra running in different directions. The intruders opened fire at the illusions. Elias grabbed Lyra and moved through the confusion toward the maintenance tunnel she had discovered. A pulse round struck the wall beside his head, showering him with molten sparks. "I dislike these people," Lyra whispered. "That makes 2 of us. We are building a strong diplomatic agreement." They reached the tunnel hatch just as one attacker recognized the deception. Elias shoved Lyra through first, turned, and fired into the chamber's gravity regulator. The floor twisted sideways. The intruders were thrown across the room, colliding with consoles as furniture and weapons rose into the air. Elias sealed the hatch behind them. The maintenance tunnel was barely wide enough for him to crawl. Warm blue light pulsed through transparent conduits beneath their knees, carrying unstable reactor energy toward emergency vents. Every pulse made the metal tremble. "Who were they?" Lyra asked. "People who do not want us reaching the Queen." "Why?" Elias hesitated. "She deserved the truth, but not all of it at once." "Because someone caused the explosion." Lyra stopped crawling. Her long ears lowered slightly. "On purpose?" "Yes." "To kill my mother?" "And you." For several seconds, only the reactor's deep heartbeat filled the tunnel. Elias expected fear. Instead, Lyra's expression hardened in a way that reminded him of Queen Seraphine. "Then we cannot only escape," she said. "We must stop them." "You are 8. I am royal. That is not a medical condition that makes you bulletproof." A tremor rolled through the tunnel. Behind them, metal screamed as the attackers forced open the hatch. Elias looked ahead. The passage ended at a ventilation shaft leading toward the lower civilian sectors. He pushed Lyra forward. "Keep moving." They emerged onto a collapsed transit platform where several dozen civilians had gathered behind overturned cargo containers. Merchants, technicians, servants, and injured guards stared at Elias with hollow faces. A dimensional fracture had opened across the main exit, and beyond it prowled 2 large creatures covered in mirror-like armor. Every attempt to cross had ended with someone dragged into the dark. An elderly engineer approached Elias. "The emergency bridge controls are destroyed. Can they be bypassed?" "With a reactor-fed power coupler. We lost ours during the collapse." Elias removed the damaged energy cell from his rifle and looked at the bridge console. "This will not be enough," the engineer warned. "No," Elias said. "But that conduit beneath the floor might. That carries raw helium plasma. So I should avoid touching it. You should avoid standing within 20 meters of it." Elias glanced around the platform. "Unfortunately, I did not bring 20 meters." While Lyra helped organize the civilians, Elias opened the floor panel and exposed the pulsing conduit. Heat distorted the air above it. He connected his rifle cell to the bridge controls, then used a broken drone arm to tap the conduit's energy. The bridge projector roared to life. A narrow path of hard light formed across the fracture. The creatures turned toward them. "Everyone across," Elias shouted. The civilians hesitated until Lyra climbed onto a cargo container. "I am Princess Lyra of Elindra," she called. "You will move now, and anyone who argues will be assigned extra lessons with my tutor." That threat proved remarkably effective. The civilians rushed onto the bridge. Elias fired at the creatures while two injured guards helped families across. His shots did little against their mirrored shells, but he noticed each beast exposing a soft inner membrane whenever it opened its jaws. "Of course," he muttered. "The dangerous part is inside the mouth. Very considerate design." The first creature charged. Elias waited until its jaws opened, then fired his remaining pulse directly into its throat. The beast crashed through the platform railing and vanished into the fracture. The second leapt onto the bridge. Civilians screamed and froze. Lyra seized the emergency scanner Elias had given her and threw it at the creature's head. The impact caused no damage, but the device emitted a piercing alarm. The creature turned toward her. "Lyra!" Elias shouted. She stepped backward, drawing it away from the civilians. Elias sprinted, grabbed a loose power cable and looped it around the creature's rear limbs. An injured guard understood immediately and activated the cargo winch. The cable snapped tight, dragging the beast sideways into an exposed plasma vent. Light filled the platform. When Elias could see again, only blackened fragments remained. Lyra stared at the melted scanner. "I think I broke it." "You threw it at a dimensional predator. You said to watch for danger." "I did not say to attack danger with the equipment." The last civilians crossed. Several remained on the far side instead of fleeing. The elderly engineer picked up a pulse cutter. The injured guards raised their weapons. "We are coming with you," one said. Elias looked at the frightened faces that had chosen to stay. "Why?" The engineer nodded toward Lyra. "Because she did." Far above them, the hidden saboteurs received confirmation that the assassins had failed. A final command was transmitted into the reactor network. "Release the core beasts." Deep beneath the complex, containment chambers opened one by one. The first core beast emerged before the civilians reached the upper transit ring. It tore through 3 armored doors as though they were sheets of paper, filling the corridor with the shriek of twisting metal. Elias saw its shadow before he saw the creature itself. Broad, horned, and moving with a weight that made the floor buckle beneath every step. The survivors stopped behind him. "That," the elderly engineer whispered, "was designed to live inside reactor chambers." Elias checked the charge remaining in his damaged rifle. Naturally, keeping harmless pets would have been too sensible. The creature stepped into the emergency light. Its body was covered in dark plates glowing from within, and streams of Helian energy moved beneath its skin like trapped lightning. 2 more shapes followed behind it. The saboteurs had released predators adapted to radiation, heat, and dimensional distortion. In other words, everything currently useful against them was useless. Lyra stood close to Elias, exhausted but refusing to show it. "Can we fight them?" "We can delay them." "That is not the same thing. It is when running is included in the strategy." Elias ordered the civilians toward a freight passage leading to the Royal Command Sector. The injured guards remained with him while the engineer opened a maintenance panel beside the wall. "There is a magnetic containment grid beneath this corridor," she said. "It was built to stop reactor fuel transports." "Can it stop those?" "For perhaps 6 seconds." Elias looked at the approaching beasts. Luxury. They waited until the first creature charged. The engineer triggered the grid. Blue bands of force erupted from the floor and locked around the beast's limbs. Elias and the guards fired into the glowing seams beneath its armor. The creature roared, snapped one energy band, then another. 6 seconds? Elias shouted. It was an optimistic estimate. Engineers should not be allowed optimism. The final band shattered. Elias rolled aside as a claw carved through the wall where he had stood. One guard fired into the beast's open mouth. The blast staggered it long enough for Elias to shoot an exposed Helian gland beneath its jaw. The creature collapsed, but the remaining 2 climbed over its body. "That was the small one," the engineer said. "Thank you," Elias replied. "I was worried my day might improve." They retreated through the freight passage, sealing doors behind them, but the beasts broke through each barrier. The civilians reached a junction where Queen Seraphine's rescue signal finally appeared on Lyra's beacon. It was close, less than 400 meters away. Then the corridor ahead folded inward under a dimensional pulse, leaving a gap filled with open stars. The Queen was on the other side. "Mother!" Lyra shouted into the beacon. Static answered, followed by Seraphine's broken voice. "Lyra, stay where you are. I am coming." Elias looked behind them. The beasts were approaching through smoke. He studied the fractured corridor, then the suspended maintenance rails crossing the void. "You will take the civilians over those rails," he told the engineer. "And you?" "I will make sure our guests do not follow." Lyra grabbed his wrist. "No. Your mother is across the gap. Then you are coming too." Elias knelt in front of her. He wanted to offer another joke, something light enough to hide the truth, but none came. "You asked how you could know I would not leave you." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. This is how." He lifted her and placed her into the engineer's arms. Then he turned away before she could reach for him again. The survivors began crossing the narrow rails while Elias remained at the junction. He overloaded every power cell, drone battery, and pulse charge they had left, arranging them around the corridor. The first beast burst through the smoke. Elias fired until his rifle died, then drew his sidearm. Across the void, Queen Seraphine appeared with Captain Vaelor and the remaining royal guards. She saw Lyra moving toward her. Then she saw the human standing alone behind them. "Get him across," Seraphine ordered. "We cannot reach him," Vaelor said. The dimensional gap widened. Elias shot one beast in the eye, ducked beneath its claw, and triggered the first overloaded cell. The blast tore away part of its armor but threw him against the wall. His helmet cracked. Blood ran along his temple. The second creature lunged. He drove his sidearm into its open jaws and fired until the weapon melted in his hand. Lyra reached the Queen, but instead of embracing her, she turned and screamed Elias's name. Seraphine followed her gaze. The human was on one knee now, wounded, unarmed, and still positioned between the monsters and the child. All around the Queen stood soldiers who had retreated, commanders who had declared the sector lost, and nobles who had already spoken of succession. Yet the man they had considered ordinary had stayed. Elias pulled the final detonator from his belt. The largest beast charged. "Come on," he muttered. "I have survived military food. You are not frightening enough." He waited until it was almost upon him, then activated the charges. The corridor vanished in white fire. The shockwave crossed the void and threw everyone to the floor. For several seconds there was only silence. Then the fractured gravity field stabilized, revealing Elias beneath a collapsed support beam. The beasts were gone. Queen Seraphine crossed the rail before anyone could stop her. She reached him with Lyra close behind and lifted the beam with the help of her guards. Elias was barely conscious. "You found her," he whispered. Seraphine looked at her daughter, alive and clinging to his arm, then back at the human soldier, whose armor had been torn almost beyond recognition. Tears filled her golden eyes and fell freely across her face. "No," the Queen said, her voice breaking. "You brought her back to me." Elias woke beneath a ceiling made of living crystal, where pale lines of medical light moved like slow rivers. For several seconds, he believed he had died, and discovered that the afterlife had excellent engineering. Then pain returned to every part of his body at once, correcting the misunderstanding. A medical drone hovered over him and announced, "Patient consciousness restored. Please avoid movement, combat, explosions, and heroic decisions for 72 hours. Elias tried to sit up. The drone pushed him back down. "Human intelligence remains questionable." "That seems unnecessary," he muttered. "Accurate statements are not considered unnecessary." Across the recovery chamber, Princess Lyra laughed. She sat beside Queen Seraphine, her arm wrapped in a small regenerative brace, though her bright eyes and raised ears showed she had already recovered most of her energy. The Queen looked different without ceremonial armor. Exhaustion shadowed her face, yet relief softened the authority she usually carried like a shield. "You have been unconscious for 4 days," Seraphine said. "I was hoping for 5. I have unused leave." Lyra hurried to his bedside. You said you would not leave me. I did not. You nearly died. That was not leaving. That was briefly becoming difficult to speak with. The Queen lowered her gaze, hiding a fragile smile. Beyond the medical wing, Elindra was healing. The Helion reactor had been sealed inside a gravitational tomb and launched toward an empty star system where it could collapse without harming another world. The dimensional fractures were closing, though strange creatures still appeared occasionally in ventilation ducts, causing officials to develop an unexpected respect for maintenance workers. The surviving civilians had testified about the assassins, the sabotage, and the guards who had abandoned their posts. Records recovered from the hidden command chamber led directly to Chancellor Orvin and several military commanders who had planned to destroy the royal family, blame humanity for the disaster, and seize control during the evacuation. Captain Vaelor personally arrested them. When Orvin claimed royal immunity, Vaelor informed him that explosions did not recognize diplomatic privileges. Elias considered that evidence the captain's sense of humor had survived after all. 3 weeks later, the rebuilt Central Plaza filled with representatives from across the empire. Holographic banners floated above the crowd, displaying the names of those who had died and those who had stayed to help others. The elderly engineer and the injured guard stood near the royal platform, newly appointed to lead an independent planetary rescue corps. Civilians who had once hidden behind cargo containers now wore silver insignias shaped like open hands, symbols of courage without rank. Elias waited at the edge of the platform in a formal uniform he disliked immediately. "Why does this collar feel designed by an enemy?" he whispered. Vaelor stood beside him. "It is ceremonial." "That does not answer the question." Vaelor's ears twitched. "You complained less while fighting core beasts." "The beasts did not expect me to stand still." Queen Seraphine stepped before the gathered worlds. Lyra remained at her side. But when the queen began speaking, the princess moved away from the throne and stood beside Elias instead. Seraphine described the sabotage, the evacuation, and the fear that had revealed both weakness and courage. She did not hide the failures of her soldiers or the shame of her government. Then she looked toward Elias. "Our empire once measured worth through ancestry, strength, and rank. During the disaster, those measures failed. The most decorated fled. The most powerful hesitated. Yet one soldier from a distant world carried my daughter through fire, darkness, and the ruins of space itself." Elias wished the platform would open and swallow him. Public praise remained the only danger he had never trained to face. Sergeant Elias Venn did not act because he expected reward. The queen continued. He acted because a frightened child had been left alone. She raised a small golden insignia. "For that reason I name him Guardian of the Crown and grant him authority equal to the highest commanders of Elindra." Elias leaned toward Lyra. "Does this position involve paperwork?" "A great amount." "I should have remained unconscious." Lyra smiled and took his hand. The crowd began to applaud, first uncertainly, then with growing force. Alien officers struck their fists against their armor. Human delegates rose from their seats. Even Vaelor bowed his head. Elias looked across the plaza and understood that the honor was not truly about him. It belonged to everyone who had stopped running, the engineer who rebuilt the bridge, the civilians who returned to help, the guards who found courage after fear had stripped away their pride. He had entered the reactor complex believing duty meant following orders. He left understanding that duty sometimes began when orders, systems, and stronger people failed. Later, as the ceremony ended, Lyra found him staring at the memorial wall. "Will you stay on Elindra?" she asked. "Your mother offered me a position." "That is not an answer. You are becoming dangerously skilled at royal questioning." She waited. Elias looked toward the recovering city, where repair vessels crossed the sky and new energy towers glowed safely beneath the stars. "Yes," he said. "I will stay." Lyra nodded as though the decision had always belonged to her. Queen Seraphine joined them, her long ears catching the evening wind. "The palace has prepared quarters for you." Near the princess? Elias asked, directly beside her tutor. He stared at the queen. Seraphine's expression remained perfectly serious, but amusement shone in her golden eyes. Your Majesty, Elias said, I believe that violates several interstellar treaties. For the first time since the explosion, the queen laughed without grief beneath it. Above them, the last dimensional fracture closed, leaving only stars.